Bristol city docks today, no longer the commercial port that flourished here for 8 centuries. This old crane on Wapping Wharf was constructed in 1878. It's referred to locally as the steam crane, or sometimes as the Fairburn steam crane, after its designer, Sir William Fairburn. It was built by the Bath firm of Stothert and Pitt to load railway wagons, and powered by 2 steam engines. It could lift 35 tons, an enormous load at the time. Sadly, it was nearly obsolete by the time it came into operation. His design was already 28 years old when it was built. Just 4 years after it was constructed, far more flexible hydraulic cranes started to appear around the docks. And within 15 years, electric cranes. The steam crane belonged to a different era. It took over an hour to lift 1 load. Understandably, it didn't get a lot of use. But while most of the later cranes have gone, it is still here. It has survived. And in Britain today, anything, or anyone for that matter, that survives becomes heroic. The very act of survival becomes a cause for celebration. An object becomes a heritage asset, and a person a national treasure. But perhaps this crane's survival led it to having the last laugh. In the 1950s, cargo began to be shipped in large containers, and this crane was the only one here with the power to lift them. The crane still works, and is still occasionally operated as a museum exhibit. In fact, its continuing survival is now assured. It has, like Stonehenge, become a scheduled ancient monument, preserving it for the future. The original purpose of the crane was to load cargo directly onto the railway. In the 1970s, when the docks were changing from commercial to leisure uses, this plan resurfaced. A group of local people had the idea of using the crane to haul leisure boats and yachts out of the Avon and then lower them onto railway wagons. The wagons would then be shunted up the siding so that their hulls could be painted, holes repaired, and so on. Like the crane, the railway is now a museum piece and provides short passenger trips along the quay. I'm not sure how practical the idea of lifting boats onto trains would have been, but it does seem quite visionary. And what interests me is, rather than the crane and railway being museum pieces, they would have been kept in use, doing real work. Isn't this a good example of creative thinking? The sort of thinking we need more of, so that heritage isn't just about retaining and preserving things for the sake of it, just because it has survived. Heritage could be about preserving things that work, that have a purpose. I think we're in need of more ideas like that today. I sometimes wonder about this desire to turn the whole country into a graveyard monument to the past. Is it healthy? In the 1950s and 60s, everyone said, let's tear down the old and bring in the new. There's been a reaction against that idea. But has the pendulum swung too far? Is it good for the intellectual health of the country, this obsession with the past? Is it a modern form of ancestor worship? Food for thought. This manually operated crane is the Iron Jib, situated at the Mud Dock in Bristol's harbour, a name that dates from the days when the city docks were tidal. It is on the approximate site of an 18th century structure called the Great Crane, which was powered by treadmills. Now, remember that 1970s suggestion of using the steam crane to lift boats? Well, on a smaller scale, this crane for many years did exactly that. Boat owners would get the key from the harbour master for a wooden chest that held winding handles, and then use the crane themselves to haul their boat out of the water for repairs. But look, there are no boats here now. A combination of health and safety rules and gentrification has put paid to the crane's practical use. It looks like it's still in working order, but like the steam crane and the railway, it's now a museum piece. So, let's think about this heritage that we keep, we visit and take rides on. What is it about it draws tourists? It's not information, the traditional purpose of museums. Modern technology makes this redundant. If information is what I was seeking by my visit here today, I could have found out far more about the history of the docks by looking on the internet. Is there a spiritual aspect to this? Do visits to heritage sites reflect the medieval obsessions with holy relics? Yeah. Are the tourists the modern pilgrims? The medieval pilgrims were, at least in part, seeking some form of absolution. Perhaps in some ways it is the same thing. Perhaps the visitors feel fulfilled because they have seen an old object connected to a time and place beyond their own. Now that brings us to the camera, the talisman of the modern visitor. Does taking a picture capture a relic for the visitor, who is perhaps a heritage pilgrim? Do we feel that we get some form of salvation if we've visited as many heritage sites as possible, or campaign to keep some obsolete object as a monument to the past? What do you think?